Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of 10 for the Artists. My name is Lance Powell, Supervising Art Director for Cloud Imperium, and this is...
Daniel Comenci, a surfacing artist, and I want to thank all the subscribers for making this show possible and all of our shows possible.
Now, Dan,
What's
if
up?
that's your name. We have 10 questions here from some of the subscribers, so I'm just going to get right into it, and we'll just kick things back and forth. First question is from Blackjack. In the real world, fuel comes to the aircraft instead of the craft traveling to a central fuel depot. Will this be the case for Star Citizen? Basically, they want to know if they're going to be able to purchase additional fuel, store fuel in their hangar, and so on.
So a couple of things. You will definitely be able to purchase fuel. You will be able to, well, the plan is to allow some ships to be able to collect fuel from nebulas by just flying through them and then converting them inside the ship to actually use it as a propellant. And then we've got ships dedicated to fuel entirely, like one of the versions of the Starfarer. It's the entire purpose of it is just to haul fuel from one location to the other, and it's got the ability to refuel ships while in flight. So that's kind of cool.
Sounds like a space AAA.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, so you run out of fuel, you hit the button, and it says, on Star, can I help you? And you're like, I'm stuck out here in a nebula.
Yeah, I'm hoping we make it sort of like a skill challenge where you have to actually line up your ship onto the Starfarer ship, you know, get them to dock properly and then refuel and just take off. But who knows? We're still working on that.
And if you're texting, then what happens? And you run into the fuel
Crash
depot,
and
the whole
burn.
thing. Yeah, okay.
Kill about 16 people.
That's right? The second question, it's a good one. This is a kind of a multi-pronged question.
Okay.
This is from Notable Joe. Since you're creating pieces for the far future, how do you come up with a good design that's not too sci-fi cheesy or too retro? Have you asked CR to send you into orbit for, research? So,
we joke about it sometimes, about getting sent into orbit. I actually want to do the vomit rocket, the parabolic flight. That'd be super cool. So coming up with a cool design.
Can I just stop you for 2 seconds?
Yeah.
And just join me in this?
Sure.
CR, we want to go to space for research.
For research.
For research. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, so the design question, I think in a previous 10 for the artist talked about this a little bit. We tend to start off with real life examples of what it is that we're trying to achieve. So if a spaceship is designed to accomplish a specific goal, whatever that might be, transporting fuel, dogfighting.
Space AAA.
Space AAA, right. A mining ship, whatever it is. We collect as many references for the actual function before we even start figuring out how we're going to design the aesthetics of the ship. So we start off with function, then we go ahead and build a design around it. Mm-hmm. The rest of that comes from some of the style guides that we've already put in place for the manufacturers. So if you have an Aegis ship, which is supposed to be a mining vessel, the Reclaimer is actually not a mining vessel, but as an example, let's assume there was an Aegis ship that was a mining vessel. We would start off with mining equipment as references, then we'd go ahead and apply the Aegis aesthetic on top of that. So we'd have smooth curves, we'd have like space shuttle paneling, since that's part of the look for them. And we'd probably have the intakes on the top, since that's like an Aegis thing. So we have style guides which define some of the elements that these ships need to have. And that's kind of how we arrive at the look. And we'll do variations of that and pick the coolest one.
Right, I think just to add some color to that, the game takes place in the year 2900, and one of the things that we kick around a lot, more as a form of entertainment to new people who come on, myself included, is the year 2900 is really just a date that works for the story. It doesn't have practical implications on how design is going to work in the future. And a good example of that would be there's some technology that is being worked on today, and that technology far outshoots anything that we're planning for Star Citizen 900 years later. Mm-hmm. So the concept that we've been working with on the art side, specifically with the persistent universe and with some of the concept art, instead of people going, well, in 900 years, we're going to have everything's going to be a hologram, and you may have a teleporter, and your dog is going to be made out of nanobots, and there'll be a reform and reform. Instead of all that stuff, we're saying, you know, you can take a look at Rome as an example. And 2,000 years ago, Rome was a dominant culture on the planet. They were hundreds of years ahead of almost every other culture, and then they had the plagues and wars, and they were sacked several times by the Gaul, and it basically sent them back into the Stone Age. So 900 years is really, what does it mean, right? When you look at Star Wars, is that 900 years? When you look at Star Trek, is that 300 years?
Right, right.
So it's our timeline and how we choose to tell the story. And to your point about the ships, I think that the ships take a nod from a lot of the cultural and creative influences that we grew up with. So you're always going to see something that inspired us at some point in time, slowly work its way into some of our designs because that's what we grew up with, so that's what we really enjoy. And I think, you know, more importantly, it's also what CR's taste is. It's kind of like right in line with the stuff that we grew up with. So, you know, I think the aesthetics kind of lends itself to something that we've seen re-envisioned more than something that we've never seen because we can't imagine what stuff's going to look like 900 years from now.
Right, right.
Third question is from Wonderchin. Are we going to see more interior concept in the future?
Yes.
Love it.
Done.
Love it. Boom! Now, follow-up question, and this is my own win. I'm kidding. Answer that. Yes. The next question comes to us from Jack Cruz. Several ships in Star Citizen take on design influences from popular sci-fi and Covenant warships in the Halo series. I have some of the more iconic and memorable designs in video game history. The question, could we expect to see a pledgeable capital ship, such as the new Corvette, have its design influenced by those of the Covenant?
That's a hard one to answer. I know for me, like I said, I try to keep my references as real world as possible. We do have other spaceships that we look at as, you know, as reference and inspiration as well, but we're definitely not sitting down sort of picking other ships from other universes and saying we want this ship. It really comes down to the purpose, you know, what is that we're trying to accomplish with the personality of the vessel, what its purpose is, and then we build from there. We may use small elements that from other sci-fi universes that we've seen, but we're definitely not sitting there saying, hey, we need our version of exactly that ship, right? That doesn't happen. Right.
To add additional information to the conversation, you know, and this isn't a direct response to the question, but one of the things that the design team is looking at is using frequencies of light. So, you know, if you're using a red laser, you're going to have a longer band and it'll have less impact. If you're using, you know, a green laser, it'll be somewhere in between. If you're using a blue laser, it'll be a shorter frequency and far more damage. Everything in between, all the various damage styles, all the various range styles that come along with that. So the complexity is, it's being discussed right now to incorporating more real world style of future laser effects.
Right, right.
And I think things like neutron weapons, proton weapons, we're treating more like practical physics instead of traditional sci-fi.
Right, right.
So that the weapon itself will provide, you know, you knock a couple neutrons off of an atom and all of a sudden you've got an accumulation of something with extremely heavy mass. So instead of it being a beam weapon, it is a beam weapon, but it's like you got hit by a bus.
Right.
Okay, so the next question comes to us from Kaiser Sose. Great name. What is the purpose of the bed and living quarters on smaller ships? It was originally thought of the only way to save and log out in space. Many thought it was the balance between the single-seaters.
Right now, that's where it's still at. What's
the future?
It's you go out into space, hop into your little bed, go to sleep, and that's how you can kind of log off in space, and it might save your state out there. It's still something that we have to prototype and test to see if it actually makes it in as a game mechanic. So I guess the answer to that question as well is maybe.
What about things that you're working on right now, like the component swap?
Well, yeah, so components, ultimately what we'll want to do is build our components, which will include beds and sinks and toilets and bathrooms and things like that. Build it so that we can just use them on every ship, or as many ships as possible, so we can reuse the assets, and that bakes in the ability to potentially customize the interiors. Now, do not take me at my word at that, because the smaller ships are all basically custom interiors, right? You will not be able to swap out an Aurora bed for a Mustang bed, for example. That's not going to happen. But it might be possible in the future. We're kind of trying to build our assets to make that a possibility later on. Now, the other components, such as fuel tanks, ammo boxes, power plants, ballasts, like we have, I don't even know how many, in the tens of different types of components, which are all completely swappable across all ships of the same class. So there's a little bit of that going on, and all of those components definitely have heavy gameplay implications. For example, if you have a ammo box on one side of your ship, that is now adding mass to one side of your ship. The handling of your ship is going to take a hit as a result of that. The avionics will still compensate in order to make it as unnoticeable as possible, but the moment you start using the weapon and the weapon starts drawing ammo from the box, you start losing mass, which changes the handling of your ship. And every component, depending on its location on the ship, will affect the mass at that location, which then changes the rotation speed. It affects the physics in a major way. And I'm not the best person to talk about how the physics work, but the whole thing is going to be awesome. Yeah, it's going to be really cool.
Here's a good question. This question is from Rancid. Rancid asks, when in the PU will player ships be distinguishable from NPC ships? And the question continues, by not having unique identifying colors or symbols, it could make players think twice before engaging in a ship.
That's an interesting gameplay question. Right now, that has to be play tested to see. I'm a really big fan of not really giving you an obvious distinguishing element between the two, because I do want the world to feel, one, extremely cohesive, and I want there to be weight behind your decisions. So if you decide to attack a ship, you may not immediately know that it's either an NPC or a PC player. And you may change your mind depending on the two. Now, the cool thing about not giving you obvious identifiers on a ship is that then requires you to get a scanner, right? It adds to the gameplay loop. So if you do get a scanner and scan the ship, then you might now have the information that you need to make that decision. So I prefer going that route. Ultimately, it comes down to game design, and they'll make the best decision for the game once it's play tested. But my vote is don't distinguish.
Right. I think to add a little extra color to that as well, I think that the lighting schemes on various style ships will also play a minor part in that. So when we get down to a lot of the pirate ships, they're visible markers at a distance based off the lights, and any type of material use will show them as being potential enemy at a glance. But to Daniel's point, that you may not actually get a sense of friend or foe, and you may not want that sense of friend or foe at a glance, because you want that interaction, you want that there's a little more thrill about being able to sit back, watch before you engage, and if you're engaged, or if there's some other marker that comes at you that says, oh, okay, they're firing on me, it's probably a bad guy, then it triggers that engagement. The classic style gaming where it's like you go to your nav point and all of a sudden there's 4 or 5 blips of red. It's a little arcadey, and that's something that we've been trying to avoid. We have a question from Nostromo, 1977. Can the art team create cultural goods for the PU, such as paintings, sculptures, porcelain, etc., and will they have the inherent value to the players, but would be highly contested wealth for powerful NPCs? I don't want to say no. We haven't discussed that on the PU side, so it's not something that potentially wouldn't happen in the future, but I can't say that it's happening now. That hasn't been in discussions. The next question comes to us from Dr. Big Money. Also a great name. What will the art team's role be in uninhabited planets? Will you guys essentially create planet texture sets and then the procedural stuff will kick in? Can we expect to see planet-side environments that require special equipment just to pay visits, such as different atmospheres, different breathing suits, temperature protection, gravity protection, visibility differences, and so on?
Well, right now the art team is focusing on building out the inhabited locations, and we will have uninhabited locations as well. Now, further in the future, once the game is released, I know that we're going to be doing R&D on potentially procedurally generated planets so that we can expand the number of locations. And we will still have to create art for that as well, even if it's procedurally generated. So the answer is yes, we will be building art for all locations.
Are you sure about that? Is that your final answer?
I don't know how else we would see art, even if the programming... It's just not the way our game is built. So I'm pretty convinced that we'll have artists building art even for procedurally generated planets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the methodologies that we're using right now is split between 90-10 and then 10-90. And that means that the majority of the encounters that you'll have on a auto-generated planet will be auto-generated encounters versus the other side, which is you go to a planet like Terra and the experience is going to be very well crafted. Mm-hmm. So it depends on which planet you go to, which system you're spending your time around, and so on. Something that was also brought up in the question, which is really interesting, is the breathing apparatus, how is your ship impacted by planets with higher gravity? Those conversations have been discussed and they're in the works. The details are to be determined.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one easy way that we could, sort of example, you mentioned how ships might be affected by different atmospheres and temperatures and things like that. Because of the way we're building our damage system, we may be able to leverage that in order to apply effects to the ship based on the experience that the ship is getting, right? So if you go through an especially hot environment and that's peeling off your paint or whatnot, we have the technology built in to leverage that in order to like actually affect your ship in that way. Right. So, if you go through a crazy hot planet and leave, now you may look scorched, right? So the foundation for doing that exists.
Right, right. So the next question comes to us from Akia Kaoshi. So far, the art direction has been fairly Western feel. Will we see more non-Western influences such as Indian, Chinese, Middle Eastern, etc. in upcoming locations? So I'll take a first stab at that. I think that Dan will take the second part of that. The short answer is going to be yes. The way that we're approaching the planets right now through a lot of our sci-fi influences, and we're talking more desolate planets from Star Wars, Luke's home planet, to Hoth. But we're also looking at components like Blade Runner, and basically we're drawing from all of our experiences. And a lot of those are going to not just feed back into the persistent universe, but we're going to have to continue to build out the persistent universe style, the structures, the environments, because you do want to show cultural influence and how it's impacted planets. That said, the way that we've been approaching a lot of these things is through as much modern reason as we can, which is 100 years from now, what happens to human space exploration? Well, we colonize the moon, we colonize Mars. 200 years from now, what does it look like? Okay, now we've jumped out to maybe Ganymede or somewhere else. 200 years after that, we've gone out to the next, maybe the edge of the solar system. What happens with planets like Mars is the next wave of construction. So the traditional cultural influences are really going to be determined by whoever's providing the finances to that location. But I think more importantly, they'll be building on top of the structures that have been put there. So if you look at a base on the moon or a base on Mars, say in the next 100 years, you're going to find it's very modular, very container-style system or setup. It's more akin to, I think, Cowboy Bebop in a lot of ways, or the movie Moon than almost anything else. But then, say 200 years from now, you don't just scrap those structures. You now start building on top of it with something a little more modern. So there's the art director who's driving that, Mark Skelton, and Corton at the Montreal studio. They're spending a lot of time focusing on what those rings are, and then what happens when the humans leave our system and then move out to the next system. And that first system that they move out to is a terraformed planet. Now you've got jump capabilities. That planet is now a complete overhaul of something that we've seen before. So it might not have any of the flavor that you're used to, but it may be it may take suggestions from Dubai or a couple other really ultra modern cities. But a lot of those things are being explored, and the art direction that we've got from that so far suggests that we're going to be taking nods from all those components, but not being. It won't be exact. And a good way of looking at that would be something like Naboo. Naboo had, kind of a Renaissance style architecture to it. At the same time, it had, a lot of the kind of modern day Star Wars techie stuff as well. So, depends on the lens that you're looking at the environment from. But so short answer, yes. Long answer, it's a little more complicated, but it's going to take nods from a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and we have several locations on Earth, so we will probably draw directly from the cultures at those locations.
Right.
And we have landing zones in Russia, China. I would expect that those are influenced by those cultures. Right. So yeah, definitely.
Question is from Dimicheros. Are there any plans to allow custom coloring to our ships using RGB sliders on various layers, channels of the default ship skin?
So right now we actually have all our shaders set up so that you can theoretically tint stuff with the diffuse channel, specular channel, so we could do really big significant material changes and color changes, but it's yet to be implemented in programming, and a lot of the older ships that have yet to be updated with physically accurate textures still need to be brought to that system. But once it's all in place, you should be able to take like the M50 for example and make it black, or you have Constellation, you want it blue. You should be able to do that. It's still yet to be pushed through design, but I think it's definitely a possibility in the future.
Would you say it's a lot like buying a car? So the question is kind of like buying a car, right? This first one's full control, full RGB control. But as a manufacturer and the artist for the style guide, you'd want to limit that range. Can you talk a little bit about maybe that, plus also the various material types, gloss versus pearl and so on?
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated with physically accurate textures, and we do want to keep design consistency throughout your game. Like, it'd be a little bit distracting if somebody flew through the universe with like a pink retaliator. That'd be weird. But what we'd probably end up doing is giving you different surfacing types and different gloss values, maybe different color values as like little swatches that you could see. Almost like if you've ever looked at car paint, they have orbs that you could see the surface on before you get your car coated. And you'd probably be able to see your ship. And we give you a really wide range, so it's not like we'd be limiting you too much. But pink retaliators in our universe.
The next question comes to us from Aragorn BH. What photographic or other source do you use to inspire the space artwork in Star Citizen? For example, how do you determine the colors and shading used in star types and the various planets?
Planets are a little bit... I can talk about what I use when I'm doing surfacing on ships, and normally what I go to is I have one of the popular resources among a lot of artists, especially at our company, is Pinterest. We have running galleries of a lot of stuff, and I'll look at a lot of airplanes, a lot of tanks, a lot of cars. I just slowly, whenever I see a surface that I like, I grab it, I put it in a folder, and I save it for later. So I have a library in my head of like, if I was going to go build an Aegis ship, I'd be like, okay, so Aegis is kind of militaristic, scary, industrial Panzer. That black, slightly glossy paint, you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much like a matter of texture reference for photo source, it's just like building up a reference. And you always, one of the things I keep catching artists doing is they will constantly look at other computer graphics to draw inspiration from, and the key to creating believable materials is drawing all your reference from real world things.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think to add to the question and round out the persistent universe, you also touched on it, is that we are building a universe that is meant to be accurate. So if there's a red giant, or there's a brown dwarf, or there's a white dwarf, that we're shooting for something that is meant to be plausible. I think that from the concept creation side, you know, the concept artists go through and create the look that they want based off of, you know, the feeling they're trying to capture, but then the production artists get their hands on it and we dial it in towards real world. That's all the questions for today. We want to thank the subscribers for making 10 for the Artist possible. We also want to thank all the backers for making Star Citizen possible. I'm Lance Powell, Supervising Art Director for CIG, and
I'm Daniel Kamensky, Surfacing Artist at CIG.
You put a question mark at the end.
There's a little bit of a question mark there. I'm definitely a surfacing artist.
And you're definitely with CIG? And you're definitely here.
I don't know. I might be on the moon.
Bye.
Good night.
Hey guys, thanks for watching 10 for the Chairman. If you guys would like to see more episodes, go here. If you guys would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel and always keep up to date with all our video content, go here. And if you guys would like to watch episodes of Around the Verse, go here please. And I will see you in the verse.